Hi everybody, welcome back. We are starting chapter 3. During a moment that passed in slow motion, an instant of inexpressible horror, Jay gave out one long, wide-mouthed, helpless scream that no one could hear. Jesus! At that moment, the earth gave a forceful sudden lurch, throwing Jay back into Jeff's big body. The two of them slammed against the cavern wall as if thrown there, and they could no longer see Dr. Cooper. With a slow, lazy tumble, the boulder nosed into the pile of rubble with a sickening, very final crunch, and then eased over on its side and lay there like some huge dead thing. The earthquake subsided immediately. The roar of the earth gave way to the settling sounds of the rocks, and that sound finally gave way to the gentler, rain-like sound of plinking, plunking, hopping pebbles coming to rest everywhere. The crew, particularly Jay and Lila, couldn't wait to come out of hiding. Beams of light formed conical shafts through the dust and haze, swinging wildly about as the explorers tried to find each other. Jay was just about to holler for his father when all of them heard Dr. Cooper's commanding voice booming down behind the killer boulder. "Any injuries in the party? Report." "This is Bill. I'm okay. Jeff here. Jay and I are all right." Jay had his own questions. "Dad, I want to know about you. Are you all right? Where are you?" Dr. Cooper responded with another question. "Lila, are you all right?" Lila was getting cross with her father, purely out of worry. "Dad, honestly, tell us how you are." Then they saw a beam of light wiggling about from behind the boulder, and finally there was Dr. Cooper's head poking up into view just above it. "Dad!" both teenagers cried with delight and relief. They clambered toward him. "Careful," he cautioned. "The rocks are newly fallen. They're loose." "Are you all right, Dr. Cooper?" Bill asked. The kids could see a trickle of blood on Dr. Cooper's forehead. He had discovered it himself also and proceeded to dab it with his handkerchief. "I'm all right," Dr. Cooper finally reported to everyone. "A slight cut on the forehead, but nothing major. I took a spill back there." Then came Gozan's hoarse, hysterical voice from somewhere in the dark. I saw it! I saw it! The boulder was about to crush the good doctor, but then the earth responded to young Jay's call and knocked the doctor out of the way." "That is basically right," Dr. Cooper conceded. "The last big shake knocked me over, and just in time. I'd say this cut on my head is fair trade for my life." By now, Jay and Lila were hugging him, and he seemed more concerned for their well-being than his own. Gozan, his face blackened by dust and sweat, finally emerged from his hiding place, his eyes big and round. "Your God controls the powers of the earth, yes?" he said. Dr. Cooper held Jay and Lila close as he answered boldly. "Gozan, our God controls everything. He is the creator of all things." "Maybe," Gozan dared to venture, "maybe he is stronger than the curse that guards the door." Dr. Cooper found his hat, but Lila took it from him as she said, "Our God is more powerful than any curse." Then she told her father, "No hat until I take a good look at your head." The three of them climbed down from the pile of rubble to join the others as Gozan continued to marvel. All the other expeditions would have been dead or would have fled in terror by now. Your God has protected you. He has protected all of us. "That is correct," said Dr. Cooper as they all clustered together on the cavern floor. "And we are going to thank him for that right now." Hats came off, arms went around shoulders, heads bowed, and Dr. Cooper gave a heartfelt prayer of thanksgiving for the Lord's protection. Gozan only stood there, still wide-eyed, impressed by the strange faith of this group, and very, very impressed by the towering, ominous door that seemed to be watching them, aware of their presence. So they found what they had come for, whatever that was. But first things had to come first. Tents, shelters, and temporary storage buildings were quickly set up at the edge of the dragon's throat, and the hotel rooms in Zahida were no longer kept reserved. Jeff managed to wheel and deal some old lumber from a slightly shady supplier in the city, and for the next few days the crew worked on a very effective string of ladders and stairways down the steep sides of the cavern to the sandy floor far below. A powerful gas generator provided electricity for not only the camp, but also for strong floodlights all along the cavern corridor to the big room where the doors still waited to be challenged. Throughout this time, whenever the sound of hammers, saws, or voices would cease for a moment, that strange rumbling could still be heard. Interestingly, it always grew louder and a little higher in pitch whenever someone got close to the door. And not only that, but even the earth seemed to get nervous, shaking and quivering. Every day, Gozan would hurry in his old Jeep to Zahida and let President Al-Dalam know how things were going. One such day, a week after the expedition first arrived, Gozan enjoyed a rest on the president's soft couch and drank a large mug of herbal tea as he shared the latest update with the president. "Perhaps you were right, my liege," he said after a loud slurp of tea. "These explorers, these Christians, could be different indeed. They are still there, and they are still alive." The president was trying to be hopeful, but he couldn't help pacing about the room and looking out his window toward the forbidden desert. "They have not yet succeeded, Gozan." "But my liege, they are still alive. Maybe their God will help them to open the door as well." At that comment, the president couldn't help enjoying at least one moment of glee. Yes, perhaps the great door will finally be opened and the fabulous wealth hidden there will be mine. Will be to the people of Nippur. Such wealth will make us as great as other states belonging to our people. Ha! Let them have their oil. We will welcome the nations of the world to come and look upon our vast, priceless treasures. "Provided the curse of the door does not destroy our whole nation," Gozan mused, swirling his tea leaves. "But these Christians, they may be the answer. They may be able to break the curse. Much evil has been caused already, and only because we have dared to enter the dragon's throat." Gozan couldn't help muttering, "What evil do you suppose could be unleashed if the door itself should be opened at last?" This very question was still haunting Gozan the next day when he accompanied Dr. Cooper to the base of the huge door. The floodlights were installed, the door was brilliantly illuminated, and Dr. Cooper was now ready to make another attempt to approach it. "Good doctor," Gozan pleaded, the earth shakes every time anyone gets near the door. The door knows we are here." Dr. Cooper casually inventoried the tools in his tool bag, handed the bag to Gozan, and said, "Gozan, one of these days I'm going to have to give you a basic lesson in exactly what causes earthquakes. Believe me, people don't cause them. Now let's take a look." They climbed up the pile of rubble, one step, one boulder, one shaky rock at a time, carefully picking each footrest. The size of the door made it seem close, but it still took a considerable climb to get up to it. Now flooded with light, it looked even more immense, even more sinister. The recent earthquake had knocked some of the thick dust off, revealing a very rough, aged, bronze-like surface underneath. It must certainly weigh hundreds of tons. Gozan suddenly squealed in fright. "Not again," Dr. Cooper moaned. The cavern was beginning to shake once more. Rumblings and deep moans echoed all around. Rocks quivered and rolled down the walls. Dust from the cavern floor began to rise like a thickening carpet of fog. "What did I tell you, Doctor?" Gozan said with a quivering voice. "What did I tell you? The door. It knows we are here." "Oh, stop it," Dr. Cooper ordered. The shaking stopped. Just like that. As far as Gozan was concerned, even this sudden silence was scary. The earth, it heard. It obeyed you. Dr. Cooper only shook his head. Come on, let's go. At last, feeling like they had just conquered a treacherous mountain, the two of them reached their goal. They reached the door, which towered above them and made them feel like mice. Dr. Cooper touched the dirty, dusty surface. Feels a little warm, he observed. Never have I seen such a thing. Shh. Listen. The two of them stood there very silent. I think we may have found the source of that rumble. They leaned toward the door and listened. It was unmistakable. From somewhere behind the monstrous door, deep within the earth, came that strange sound. From here it was better defined, with more complex overtones. A very low droning with many different whirrings, hummings, and higher-pitched rushing sounds. It sounds like a horrible beehive, Gozan observed. For lack of a better description, said Dr. Cooper, his ear close to the door's surface. Could be air currents. Perhaps geothermal expansion and contraction. Maybe nothing more than a swarm of bats. I've never heard anything like it before, but it does reverberate through the cavern and most certainly originates here. It seems much quieter now. Perhaps the door is afraid of you. Dr. Cooper ignored the comment. Let me have the brush there. Gozan handed him the brush, and Dr. Cooper began to carefully clean away the dust and sediment from the surface of the door. Yes, he muttered thoughtfully as he worked. Bronze. Ancient hammered bronze. But what kind of primitive technology could have formed anything so huge? Gozan pointed excitedly. What's that? What we're after, Dr. Cooper replied. Here, scrape that dirt away right there. Use that little claw tool. That's right. Now let me brush it off. Aha! Writing? Yes, we're uncovering an inscription of some kind. An unusual writing style, but it could be a form of Babylonian. It doesn't fit that kind of construction. Maybe I can make it out. The two of them worked quickly, their excitement growing. Dr. Cooper continued to carefully brush away the dirt as the inscription was slowly unveiled. All right, he said suddenly. Look, that symbol right there in the corner. That means star. Immediately, Gozan thought of the legend. The star. From heaven, you suppose? Dr. Cooper did give Gozan a glance of acknowledgement this time, then kept scraping and brushing. Yes, it is. Here, this symbol here means heaven, the upper atmosphere, the sky. The inscription continued to be revealed under Dr. Cooper's rapidly working brush. Yes, and here the symbol for falling, flying, being hurled. Yes, here's the whole sentence. The star that flew through heaven. The legend, Gozan said, his eyes bulging. The legend is true. Nimrod, Dr. Cooper couldn't help wondering out loud. Could this be the lost treasure of Nimrod? Gozan loved that word. Treasure. Look, there's more to the inscription. Key. Here's the word for key. The star that flew through heaven, will bring the key, and all will be released. The treasure of Nimrod? We can't be sure yet, but it makes sense. Nimrod, the ancient ruler of Babylon, conquered the world, hid his treasure here, and apparently was the sole possessor of the key to this door. The treasure of Nimrod? Dr. Cooper, we are rich. Dr. Cooper was already thinking ahead. We'll have to get this pile of rubble away from the door. Go tell Jeff and Bill to bring the blasting equipment." Gozan hesitated, looking this way and that. "What's wrong?" Dr. Cooper asked. Gozan fidgeted, looking downward, then smiled a very strange smile Dr. Cooper had never seen before. "Good doctor, wait. Take just a moment to think about this. We, doctor, we are the ones who have found the treasure. It is ours." Dr. Cooper knew this was going to be a conversation he would not enjoy and had no desire to get into. "Gozan, we don't know for sure whether there is a treasure, and even if there was, it would belong to the Republic of Napier, not to you or to me." Gozan threw his head back and had a really good laugh. "Oh, Dr. Cooper, you can be honest with me. Surely you were not going to let the nation of Napier have all the treasure and not keep any for yourself. No man is that foolish." "I believe I asked you to go after the blasting equipment." But Gozan was in earnest. He would have made a good salesman. Doctor, listen. Only you, with the help of your God, can even approach the door and live. Only you and I know what lies behind it. We need not tell anyone else, and no one else will even dare to enter the dragon's throat. The treasure can be ours." Dr. Cooper's voice was cold and threatening. "Perhaps I should just tell President Al Dallin that did the trick." Gozan held his hands up and with surrender and blurted, "Oh, no need to do that. I will go after Jeff and Bill and the blasting equipment. And tell Jay and Lila to come quickly with the sonar." Yes, Gozan said as he clambered down the rocks. "But think about it, Doctor. Think about it." "I'll do no such thing," Dr. Cooper muttered angrily. Jay, high on the pile of rubble and to one side of the door, was pounding against the walls with a huge sledgehammer. On the opposite side of the door, Lila pressed a special electronic sensor against the stone wall of the cavern. Down below, on the cavern floor, Dr. Cooper monitored the readings on the special sonar device, listening for the echoes of Jay's hammering coming back through the recess behind the door and watching the pattern of lines forming on the little video screen. He was making faces, turning the dials, and looking puzzled. Jay moved a little closer. "Lila, you move in too." They followed his directions. "Okay, try it again." Jay pounded the wall several times, and Lila kept the sensor against the opposite wall. Dr. Cooper leaned back and shook his head, staring with perplexity at the machine. I'll have to have Bill check this machine over. I don't think it's working." "What's the matter with it?" Jay asked. Dr. Cooper scratched his head and said, "Well, according to this readout I'm getting, there's nothing but infinite space behind the door. The sound just travels off into infinity and never comes back." Lila objected. "Well, there has to be something back there. Walls or something." Dr. Cooper only shook his head. "Not a thing." "Here you go, Doc," came Bill's gruff voice. Bill and Jeff arrived from topside carrying a case of powerful plastic explosives and a detonator. "Okay, great," said Dr. Cooper, packing up his machine. "Let's get this rubble out of the way." "Just leave it to us, Dr. Cooper," said Jeff. "Oh, we'll leave all right," Jay said. Soon the entire party stood at the bottom of the long stairway, far below the cavern's entrance and far away from the big room where the explosives had been set. Bill held the small electrical detonator in his hand. "I like this part," he said. "We'll make those boulders dance like popcorn." "Everybody ready?" asked Dr. Cooper. No one said no, so Bill threw the switch. And yes, one could say it sounded like popcorn all popping at once if the kernels were the size of houses and weighed several tons each, and the popper were a monstrous stadium. Everyone put his hands over his ears, but they could still hear the boulders bounding and pounding against the walls and ceiling of the big room, like wild ping-pong balls. They all kept their widened eyes glued on the corridor, expecting one of those cute little ping-pong balls to come bouncing out at them any moment. All they saw, however, was smoke and dust, which lazily drifted up the corridor several minutes after the crash and clatter of the explosion had ceased. "Well, maybe you did all right, Bill," Dr. Cooper said a little teasingly. "No maybe about it, Doc," Bill replied. "You go back in there and you'll find one bare door, clean as a whistle." "It'll take a while for all that dust to settle. Jay, now would be a good time for you to break out your seismometer up on top. Place some sensors around the circle up there so we can get a better idea where these quakes are coming from. Gozan, why don't you go with him? You could use some fresh air." Jay loved working with the seismometer. He loved working with any gadget, actually. This particular device was a favorite of his, though, and he'd worked with it many times before. It was a fascinating machine. It could register a man's footsteps miles away. Should another earthquake hit, the machine would be able to tell them where it was originating, how severe it was, and most important, what was causing it. Gozan assisted Jay as best he could, following Jay around the circle and planting the various sensors evenly around the circumference. He was more of a hindrance than a help, however, when his mind started running in the wrong gear again. "So," he began with that same strange smile on his face, "what do you think of our great discovery?" Jay was honest about it. "I think it's terrific. I can't wait to see what's really behind that door." Gozan laughed, a cackling sort of laugh, and said, "Why, a treasure, of course, the lost treasure of Nimrod." Then his voice lowered, and he moved in closer to Jay to say, "You know, if you wanted, you could be a very rich young man." But Jay only smiled patiently. "If there was a treasure, and if it belonged..." Gozan laughed a cackling sort of laugh and said, "Why, a treasure, of course, the lost treasure of Nimrod." Then his voice lowered, and he moved in closer to Jay to say, "You know, if you wanted, you could be a very rich young man." But Jay only smiled patiently. "If there was a treasure, and if it belonged to me in the first place..." Gozan stayed close to Jay as they walked along. Jay just kept trying to think about where to plant the next sensor, even though Gozan kept rattling away in his ear. You have helped your father find it," Gozan said gushingly. "And I don't know about you, but I have always believed that he who finds is he who owns." "Finders keepers, in other words," said Jay, planting a sensor and rechecking its spacing from the others. Gozan did not have sensors on his mind. "Yes, finders keepers, yes, just as you say." Down below in the big room, Dr. Cooper, Bill, Jeff, Tom, and Lila were inspecting the lower half of the door. Now clean as a whistle, as Bill had promised, and easily accessible. Now the door was twice as tall and made one feel twice as small to be standing next to it. Dr. Cooper carefully ran his fingers along the seams of the door and probed the very minute crack with a fine, sharp tool. "A perfect fit to begin with," he reported. "Perfectly snug and tightly sealed. It's been this way for centuries." Tom was always the heavy equipment man. "I could take a good drill to it." "Let's try it," Dr. Cooper agreed. Meanwhile, Jay's patience with the blabbering Gozan was getting very thin. Gozan just kept pecking away at him. "It would be so simple to carry the treasure away, out of the country. You have the plane. You have the vehicles." "Gozan," Jay finally snapped. "You're asking me to take something that doesn't belong to me. That's stealing, sneaking, plotting, and betraying, and I won't do it." But why not?" "What is right for you is right." Jay's mouth dropped open at that. What's right for me? Is that all you can possibly think about? Just what you want? Listen, you don't go against God's laws. When you do, you only hurt yourself. But doesn't your God want you to be happy? Doesn't he want your Father to be happy? God wants us to do our job, to do what he wants us to do. That's where real happiness comes from. Jay, I am only trying to help you out. Jay was really mad by now. No, actually, you're trying to ruin this project, and I'd rather you just kept quiet and helped me set out these sensors. Is that too much to ask? The roar of Tom's drill filled the big room with a cascade of echoes. He was sweating profusely, leaning on that drill and grinding away near the base of the door. Everyone nearby could smell something burning, and before long, the drill bit simply snapped off. Nuts! Tom exclaimed angrily. Don't touch that bit, it's hot. How's it look? Asked Dr. Cooper. Tom inspected the spot where he'd been drilling. Sorry, Doc, but it isn't going to work. Look, I haven't made a scratch, and I used my biggest drill. Dr. Cooper straightened up and tilted his hat back a little. Well, that sure isn't bronze then. What kind of metal could be so tough that you can't even get a drill through it? Ancient Babylonians had no metals like that. Bill asked, So what now, Doc? Dr. Cooper could see the plastic explosives already in Bill's hands. All right, give it a try. Set your explosives around the edges of the door in the seams. We'll see if we can't loosen that door enough to get it open. Just watch, said Bill. Hey, I forgot the detonators. I'm on my way, volunteered Lila. Jay and Gozan had finished setting out the sensors, and now they huddled near the rear core of the apparatus, the seismometer itself, which was sitting on a stand near the dragon's throat at the center of the circle. Jay adjusted the controls and made some preliminary test readings. Gozan watched with fascination. How does this work? Jay explained as he worked. Well, you see all these needles here drawing the lines on the paper as it rolls by? Each one is tuned to one of the remote sensors, and if a sensor picks up any tremors in the earth, the needle will start to wiggle and make a wavy line. We examine the pattern of the wave, and that tells us what's going on out there. But some of the lines are wiggling now. Jay knew it and was trying to fine-tune the machine to get a more accurate reading. Yeah, nothing big. Not yet, at least. But there is some kind of activity down there, and it does seem to be centered near the door. Lila had just reached the top of the stairs, puffing a bit, and was going toward the supply shed when she could feel a very familiar and unwelcome quiver under her feet. Jay and Gozan kept watching the seismometer. Jay's eyes were glued to the wavy lines on the moving paper. Okay, he said. Very heavy tremors now on the machine. A kind of rippling going on. Yes, Gozan said excitedly. I can feel them. The earth is angry. Sensors 4, 5, 8, 10. There goes 9. The shock waves are rippling outward from the door. The door? The door? Someone is tampering with it? Lila kept walking even though she was staggering from the shaking. What a life, she thought. When one eventually got used to earthquakes, she staggered to the left and she staggered to the right. Her tracks in the sand looking like a drunkard had come by, she thought as she headed for the supply shed. When she finally got there, the whole shed was quivering and creaking, and the door rattled in its frame. She reached for the door handle. The door flew open, and Lila found herself sprawled on the ground, stunned by the blow. What had hit her? The wind? The earthquake? What made the door? She froze in terror, for towering over her, his white hair blowing wildly in the breeze, his eyes big and piercing, stood that mysterious old man with the crooked staff and the leathery face. He was even more frightening up close like this, and Lila found that a scream had become jammed somewhere in her throat. This was like a nightmare. She wanted to run but couldn't. She wanted to get up, but the ground shook so hard she couldn't do that either. The old man grabbed her up violently and with powerful strides began to run across the barren circle, his hot breath chugging into her face, his grip strong as steel. Lila kicked, struggled, tried to loosen the old man's grip, tried to remember her self-defense tricks. But this was a strange creature carrying her, with crazed eyes and incredible speed, and the scream still wouldn't come. And that's where we're leaving it at chapter 3.